PAX East 2024 was all about the indie games. So today we're going to go over a bunch of the games that I saw at PAX East 2024, and we'll talk about my trip a little bit as well. For my first day of PAX, I rolled into Boston around 10 a.m., but I still managed to get some appointments on my schedule. My first couple of appointments were with a publishing studio called Joystick Ventures, and they had their two games, Star Vaders and Big Boy Boxing. Star Vaders is a tactical card game where you're using cards to issue commands to your mech. Some cards will let your mech attack, some cards will have your mech moving around the board, and some cards will drop bombs all over the board. As you move through the game, you get more cards for your deck, and as you build your deck, you get the ability to put together more combos. And beyond that, each mech has its own set of other characters that have different attributes. So if tactical card games is your thing and you like thinking strategically, then this game's probably right up your alley. And the developers were really nice to talk to. I was probably embarrassing myself with how I played the demo, but they were pretty cool. And after that, I walked about 10 feet in the other direction and I was playing Big Boy Boxing. You may remember Big Boy Boxing from last year. Well, this year they've got even more to show off with the game. Really, it's just more fighters. And in my experience, I was fighting against one specific fighter and I wound up getting my butt kicked almost immediately. Over and over again, I just kept losing against this character. I never claimed to be good at boxing video games, okay? So give me a pass on this one. Anyway, if you're a fan of Super Punch-Out, this game is clearly inspired by that series. And if you're not, that's okay. This is an arcade-style boxing game with very weird characters that all have their own quirks. And these quirks play a role in the fight that you're gonna have with them. And then I went to go play a game called Shadows of the Damned Hella Remastered. This is a remake of a game that was released on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, and it's going to be released on all major consoles and the Nintendo Switch. You play as a guy named Garcia who is traveling through hell with his companion skull friend Johnson. Johnson also happens to turn into whatever weapon that Garcia needs at that moment. You're fighting demons, you're solving puzzles, you're shooting goats to fill rooms with light. And if you're not familiar with the game, Suda51 is one of the writers on this game, and he was actually at PAX East 2024 as well. And there's much more to share on that specific note, but let's talk about that a little later. Anyway, Grasshopper Manufacture, who is the publisher and developer of this remaster, was able to get the rights back for the game from EA. And that's kind of a big deal because EA is a company that wouldn't really let go of an IP unless they really had no plans for it. So it was awesome to just see that the original developers and Suda51 were able to get control over the IP again, and now they can do something with it. Lots of the game was left unchanged, but they are going to add a new game plus mode, which I think is pretty cool. There was also this game called Astro Duel 2. It's a 6-player competitive game that has you going in and out of a starship, and it's you versus 5 other human enemies trying to win different kinds of matches. If you have parties or if you live with a bunch of roommates, this game is so solid just to have. During my time at the game with PAX, I was lucky enough to play with 5 other people, and it was fun to see this group dynamic form between us. I knew nobody there, but I felt like I was at a party hanging out with a bunch of friends, and that's exactly the kind of game Astro Duel 2 is, but it also does have a single player component. Obviously, it's not the focus of the game, but there's stuff to do in this game when you're on your own. So if you like having your friends over to play some video games, then just make sure you have this one in your library. Fast forward to day 2, I had a meeting with the Behemoth. Now, if you're not familiar with the Behemoth, they made a game called Castle Crashers, they made Battle Block Theater, and they made a game that we're going to talk about today called Alien Hominid, or specifically Alien Hominid Invasion. This game is the perfect example of a pick up and play side-scroller shooter. Whether you play solo or with friends, you're playing as an alien that's invading Earth, fighting off special agents and collecting intel, doing all sorts of weird objectives that the mothership demands. And while it is simple, things do get really hectic in this game, so if you're not careful, you could lose very quickly. But this really is one of those games that you'll pick up and play for a little while, but you'll realize that maybe 20 or 30 minutes have passed. And I know this for a fact because I got the game during PAX and I started playing it on my Steam Deck. I have not stopped playing it since. But for the purposes of our demo, the Behemoth was showing off the Juicy Variety update. It's a free update that includes new hazards, new environments, another mini-boss, a bunch of new enemies, a bunch of new power-ups, a new mutation. All these things are free, and all it does is add to the goodness that already existed in Alien Hominid Invasion. And I know I mentioned it earlier, but this game is perfect for co-op. It's an easy game to pick up. I don't think there's a lot of skill involved, so learning how to play it doesn't take very long. And it's goofy as heck. It's fun. It's just straight up fun. Go play Alien Hominid Invasion. This is not an ad. I just want you to have a good time playing video games. Sticking with the motif of fun here, let's talk about a game called Rightfully Beary Arms. And it's a top-down, twin-stick shooter wherein you play as a cute and cuddly teddy bear. A teddy bear that happens to be armed enough to fight its way through demons and monsters. If you've played games like Enter the Gungeon, then you're gonna be right at home with Rightfully Beary Arms. You move through these levels, clearing out enemies, you're collecting power-ups, you're getting new weapons as you go, and eventually you're gonna fight a boss. And if you're anything like me, you're gonna lose to that boss 2 times. I don't know if I had performance anxiety at PAX with the developers watching me play. This is a running theme. I was just bad at most of the games I demoed. And Rightfully Beary Arms was no different, but that did not detract from how much fun I had with it. This is just another example of a game that's easy to pick up and play, and I'm actually gonna put a list of all the games that I talked about in the description of this video. Right now, it's just gonna be Steam links, so if you use Steam, it's easy to wishlist the games. But I'm pretty sure that most of these games are gonna come out on console anyway, so just stay tuned. And after the bear game, I played a game called Deathbound. At first glance, Deathbound looks like just another Souls-like, to the point where the developers were there and they were like, look, we know it looks like just another Souls-like, but give it a swing. I was happy to, because I love Souls-likes. I mean, it would be okay with me if it was just another Souls-like, but Deathbound is not just another Souls-like at all. It's a party-based Souls-like where you have 4 active characters at a time. There are more than that, so you can mix and match, but the point is that you're playing as all 4 of them at the same time. During combat, you switch between these characters, and this really is a cool way to mix things up, because one scenario might call for a mage, another scenario might call for a guy with a giant bat, and then the next scenario might call for a thief who sneaks around. But this game really gets interesting when you start to combine all of these characters, and then you use something called a morph attack. And now what this is swapping between characters mid-attack, which does a bunch of damage to whatever you're fighting. And for me, this was a very, very gratifying thing to pull off. You can also dash and then switch between characters doing that. There's lots of little things you can do to really make use of this game's systems. And on top of that, you have to be careful on how you arrange the characters you've chosen, because you might choose 2 characters that don't get along. So the lore of the game and the lore of these characters affects how your build will play out depending on who you've got active. And the setting of Deathbound is like the icing on the cake here. It's set in a time that isn't really in time. So you've got futuristic walls and doors on one side and medieval caverns and things on the other side. And to me, this was a really cool departure from the medieval setting that almost all Souls-likes take on. With all of this being said, the game controlled really well. I had fun with it, and I'm really excited to play the full version. Now, the next 3 games are published by a company called Apogee Games. But instead of holding these demos on the expo hall floor, they actually had these demos in a hotel room suite, which was nice because then I got to actually talk to the developers and also get some free snacks. You're gonna give me free granola bars and let me try your video games out? Yeah, I'm in. So the first of these games that I got to play was a game called LUCID. If you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, you know that I get excited for side-scrollers, for pixel art, and for fun platformers. But the most bonkers part of this game to me is that it's being built by a single developer named Eric. But even this early demo reminded me so much of Mega Man X, of Celeste, of Metroid, of all of these games that you know you're gonna have fun when you play, especially if you like a solid 2D platformer. The way the character dashes around the screen, the way you're jumping off the walls, the way you're chaining moves together through the air, all of this was that same gratification, but it also stands on its own. It's not just going out of its way to try to feel like those games, it's also adding its own twist. You've got attacks that are also traversal moves, you've got puzzles to solve. You've got things to do in this game that make it feel really gratifying, and on top of all of that, it's got lore if you want it. But one of the main reasons that I'm excited about this game is that Eric is a really nice person. We both started relating about how Mega Man X has inspired us both in different ways, and how games like this are our lifeblood and why we love video games. So it was really cool to just talk with him for a bit and really feel how excited he was for this game to start taking shape. Because I can't imagine the stress that a developer might feel, whether they're big or small, when they bring their game to a convention like this. Especially PAX, where you've got journalists, content creators, and the public checking out their game for the first time, and everyone's already drawing all these conclusions just from the 2 minutes they played. But in the case of LUCID, I played it for like 20 minutes, and I'm really excited to play another 3 hours of it. And after LUCID, I played a game called Questmaster. This was literally 2 feet to the left in this hotel suite. Questmaster is a dungeon creator / dungeon crawling game. In keeping with this Super Nintendo inspiration, Questmaster is heavily inspired by A Link to the Past. There aren't that many details about the single player experience, but but I do know that it requires you to do both dungeon building as well as dungeon crawling. And as you move through the game, you unlock more parts, which gives you the ability to make more creative decisions. You don't have a key to that door, you need a switch to open that door, well then you can just place it on the map. I'm sure there's going to be more to it, and then you can open that door and you can get that key. As a matter of fact, you can create an entire overworld which is filled with dungeons, so you can essentially make your own Zelda game, like an entire experience. And the best part about that is you can share this experience with other people. You can make your thing and then share it. When you give a player a set of tools to create something, some people can go way off the rails in the best way possible. Because I know you've seen some Mario Maker levels out there, and I know you've thought to yourself, a human made that? Like not a weird robot that's designed to make a player have a bad time? No. That's how Mario Maker levels work, so I can only imagine what kind of dungeons people are going to make online for this game. This game is still a bit of a ways off, but I was very impressed with what they had put together so far. It was very fun to play, and it's co-op, and you know I love a good co-op game. I'm also excited to see just how far the co-op goes, because I didn't mention this earlier, but you can have an infinitely large canvas to make a dungeon, so that with multiple people just seems like a great time. So after we finished with Questmaster, we went into the next room and we played a game called Bread and Fred. Not only is this game out already, but I also own and have played Bread and Fred before. I think I just made sure to get this on my schedule to show the developers just how bad Annie and I were going to be at this game. Bread and Fred is a cooperative climbing game. Each player is a penguin and you're both tied together by a rope. So coordination is key. You have to time your jumps. You use one player as a counterweight to do bigger jumps. You're swinging from one player while they hold on to the side of a mountain. All of these crazy little coordinations have to happen for you to get through this game. You can play it alone, you can play it solo, but you're just a penguin with a rock, and it works, but it's not nearly as fun as the game is for co-op. The developers know this game is pretty difficult, so they've added some cheats. You can have checkpoints, and you can have something called infinite jumping, which is what it sounds like. You can just sort of fly through the air and have fun getting through the game. This can potentially take the fun out of it, but it's also cool because you can practice a really hard jump. Much to my surprise, we didn't actually need these cheats in this play session. I was very impressed with how we did, and so were the developers. It was very fun. We actually did so well that we almost skipped the time attack mode, which is actually the new feature that brings Bread and Fred to PAX. And the time trial is essentially you and your friend racing against a polar bear who is okay at best at climbing. But I really enjoyed this way to play the game because instead of having to go through the whole map, you have this one little section to play in. So once we were done embarrassing ourselves with Bread and Fred, that was the end of my time at the Apogee Suite, and it was time for me to head back to the expo floor. And when I got there, I found the Null Games publishing booth, which is showing off a game called Streetdog BMX. Streetdog BMX is made by a developer who primarily made mobile games up until now. Now they're taking their skill set and they're bringing it to consoles and PC. They even went as far as to say that this is the BMX game that they've always wanted to make. And it's the BMX game that they've always wanted to play. And on top of that, the developer is a BMX rider themselves. And I think everybody around this game has some experience with BMX. But once I got the hang of it, the game started to fire the same neurons that fired when I played Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I started thinking about how I could chain together combos and maybe I can do a sick 360 off of that one half pipe. And if it wasn't clear, I don't know anything about BMX lingo. But I did have fun playing this demo. I'm excited to play the full version when that comes out. And then around the corner, there was this game called Athena Crisis. Now this game sort of blew my mind. It's a strategy game that looks a lot like Advance Wars, but that's in the best way possible. But the thing that makes Athena Crisis so cool is that it's built using web technologies, like the stuff you use to look at websites. The developer made it this way so that you can have a seamless experience playing the game from your web browser to your Steam Deck. And if you like strategy games, you're gonna feel right at home with Athena Crisis, but the fact that it's built using web technologies gives the developer the ability to make updates almost right down to the second that they want them live. And during PAX, apparently this developer was on standby making feature requests as people brought them up and just making changes to live sessions. The control that this developer has over this game is possibly just as impressive as the game is to play. And now that I was done at the Null Publishing booth, it was time for me to head to Limited Run Games. Now, if you know anything about this YouTube channel, you know that your boy loves unboxing stuff from Limited Run games. So you can imagine that I was excited just to hang out at the Limited Run booth as well as talk about 2 of their games. The first game you can buy right now, and it's called Arzette, The Jewel of Faramore. The game itself is an action side-scrolling platformer where you're trying to save the world from evil, you know, as you do. But what Arzette really is a callback to the Zelda games that were on the CDI. The Philips CDI was basically one of the first consoles to ever use disc-based games. But the way games were made back then, they were still figuring all these things out. They had some really interesting cinematics, and they also had a very unique art style. And these games also had voiceovers, which wasn't exactly a normal thing back in the day, so the Zelda CDI games hold a very special place in history. And now Limited Run is honoring that place in history by recreating that experience, right down to bringing some of the people responsible for those older games in to make this new one. They've got the major artist from the Zelda CDI games. His name is Ron Dunleavy, and we talked a little bit, and he told me how they use like Photoshop 1 and tracing digitally to make these backgrounds in the games, which blew my mind. They brought in Jeffrey Rath, who did the voice of Link from the CDI games, to be a voice in Arzette. And the main character of Arzette is voiced by Gene Wilbur, who played Zelda in the Zelda CDI games. And they signed my copy of the game, which I just think is really nice. So if you told me that Arzette was a game that they pulled out of the 90s archives to remake, I would have believed you. And that's because Limited Run went to great lengths to preserve the artistry that went into those older games and recreate it into something new. I think there's something so cool about that. In keeping with the tone of, you know, preserving the past by creating new things using the tools of the past, this Rugrats game fooled me and my buddies so hard that we thought that it was a remake of an old Rugrats game from back in the day. We literally tricked ourselves into thinking that a game existed when this is a brand new Rugrats game being developed for the Nintendo using Assembly, which is the code you make Nintendo games with. It's a platforming game that you can play cooperatively, and you can play as the babies from Rugrats, and it's fun. They each have their own powers. It really does feel like an old school game. But if you want, you can turn on HD mode, and that does change the art from the pixelated art that I prefer to this really high def art that makes it look exactly like the cartoon. And just because Limited Run is Limited Run, this game is also going to release on an NES cartridge that if you have an NES console, you could play this game. So Limited Run is going out of their way to remind everybody that physical media is important. It's a part of history in gaming, and they're making new history by giving us reasons to want physical media with these new games. Now that I think about it, I never did ask them if they're making Arzette into CDI format. I think that would be bananas. And that brings us to Animal Well. Animal Well is an interesting game. The demo was a limited 15-minute window of the full game, and what it is really hard to define. If you ask anybody from the Animal Well team what Animal Well is, they'll tell you it's a platformer, there's puzzles, why don't you just try it yourself? At first I was like, okay, I'm sure it's just like a platformer with interesting elements, but I see what they mean. There's a lot more going on with Animal Well than I think the game lets you in on until much later. And since the demo is only 15 minutes long, you only get a taste of that weird, mysterious aura that this game's putting out. It is a platformer, there are puzzles, but I got the sense that puzzles get more complex as time goes on, and you can solve them more creatively. Now this part is all speculation based on what I played in the demo, but I have a feeling that it doesn't stop at creative puzzle solving. I think it would be really cool if Animal Well starts to look at you differently and treat you differently depending on how you solve these puzzles. I don't know if it's like a good versus evil system or just a way that the game tries to compensate for the way you're doing things. The game's environments and the art and the music are all very nice. I'm very excited to just play the game because of how it presents itself. Of course, this is all to say that I can't wait to play the full version of Animal Well and see what the heck is going on with this game. I always have a blast at PAX East in Boston, and 2024 was no different. I like that this year was a little more indie focused. It gave them a chance to really have the spotlight. And personally, this was my first year going as a content creator. They actually went ahead and gave me a content creator badge this year, and I only have you to thank for that, because if you didn't watch my videos in any capacity, I wouldn't learn how to get better and better at this and start expressing myself in a way that makes sense. So much so that PAX actually wants me there to cover the show. So I'm just really grateful that I got the chance to go in this capacity, and I want to thank you for that, so thanks. Because I'm always going to cover PAX, but the content creator badge made it a lot easier for me to meet with developers and get time with games that I might not have otherwise played. And there's one more thing I have to talk about. Earlier in this video, I mentioned how Suda51 was at PAX East, and somehow I was lucky enough to get the chance to talk with Suda51 for 30 minutes. I had a whole interview with him. I still have to edit that interview, but I have it, and I cannot wait to share it with you. We had a great conversation. Suda is so cool. Anyway, that is the entire brain dump that I've got from PAX East 2024. Thank you very much for watching my video. I'm sure this one went on the longer side, and I will see you in the next one.